got an alarm set for
Oh,
the.
okay, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome. I'm John with Broadsheet.
Hello, John.
Hello. You're very welcome to tomorrow tonight. We're joined by human rights lawyer, barrister David Langwallner.
Hello.
Good
How
evening,
are you?
David.
No, good evening, John. How are you?
I'm very well. You're very welcome. Will we go crack straight into the papers?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we spent too long the last time talking about other things. Let's go to the papers.
Exactly. We're kind of babbling. Well, I was babbling anyway, but let me just share this now with you. 1 second. Okay, and here we are. Can you see that, Derek?
I see John Ryan has started screen sharing, but I haven't seen anything.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, here we go. Right.
Here we go.
Pinch out for a bigger view.
Here we go.
I see. Here we go. Right. I see
Okay.
the Examiner newspaper. You might scroll down, and it says every person to get vaccine this year. Well, enormously optimistic, isn't it? Every person may or may not get a vaccine, but whether the vaccine in the light of the mutants and the mutants to come, and the one that was discovered in Africa will be effective, quite apart from side effects, is a different consideration. So in a sense, it's kind of like a false dawn or a false sense of optimism, isn't it?
Okay.
There's also a headline about new law against grooming for children. Well, I mean, I'm all in favor of laws subject to what the content of it is against grooming, but the dangers of such, of course, are very apparent. I mean, there are a lot of awful vigilante groups who, and I've represented in my practice in London, who attack in a vigilante way people who they perceive to be grooming and sometimes are not. So I think such laws need to be
David,
restrained.
No, David, this is not. This is grooming children for crime. This is like.
Oh, is that? It's like the Pixote thing, then? Is that it? I mean, there's no doubt that's an enormous phenomenon. You'll notice in Southeast London, in particular, there's a tremendous growth in juvenile crime associated with gangs in drug culture contexts. And younger and younger people are being recruited. There was a film made in South America in the 1970s, 1980s called Pixote, which identified this phenomenon. And it's an extremely dangerous feature of late dark capitalism, that children or child labor is being exploited in that fashion. If that is what the law's meant to be dealing with, well, that's a very good thing.
Okay. Just on the mother and baby home report, the sort of fallout or the aftermath, Brian Besper not discussed by government. This is the home in Cork where there's hundreds of bodies apparently buried, but they don't know where, or at least the nuns won't disclose where.
Well, the Irish state has always had a total sense of historical amnesia for its sins, both past and present. I think it's important to say that. These were human rights atrocities, not that distinct from that which happened in Belsen and Dachau in some respects, towards children and women. And there is a legitimate sense of outrage, but an apology, I discovered this in the Gleeson case, apology 70 years later is an apology, but it doesn't counteract historic crimes, nor does it rectify them, really. And the relationship between the state and the church has always been toxic, and to some extent still is now. And I can understand people's legitimate sense of outrage, their sense of atonement at one level, that there has been an apology. But I don't think the Irish state is very good now, even now, in apologising for its outrages and criminality. And nothing has been done really, in my view, to structurally rectify the relationship between governance, the Department of Injustice, and the toxic authoritarian elements within the state, particularly the police. As far as the Roman Catholicism is concerned, well, I think that has changed to a significant degree, but there are still deeply repressive status attitudes, which are perhaps consequences of an element of Catholicism. But let us not throw out the baby with the bathwater. A lot of Christian, decent people of Catholic and Protestant faiths will obviously be outraged by these revelations, but I think it's much more important not to look at things historically as to cast a filter on the society we have today and to assess whether and to what extent it's much better, not least when, even though we may not be treating in that way women and children as badly, we are treating women, men and children that badly by throwing them out in the streets with an eviction pandemonium and hyperinflated rents and destroying their quality of life, as well as the mismanagement of the COVID crisis. So I don't think incompetence levels or moral blinkeredness or evil in intent, the Irish state from judiciary to governance to the politicians has got much better.
Okay. Moving on to the son. Actually, just to finish the Besborough thing, that they were they're trying to build a housing development on the land. Cork City Council. It's with Board Panola now, but Roderick O'Gorman has intervened.
Well, what has Roderick said?
There's believed to be 923 bodies buried there.
Well, I mean that's like Mary Robinson intervening at the time of the Wood Quay incident. I mean, in a slightly different context.
Well,
bear with me for a second. It's not just a question of heritage; it's a question of memory, and it's a question of in Poland, Auschwitz is kept as a historic site, not because everyone is comfortable with it, but people have to bear witness and have to bear memory. And to turn a house where there have been that many awful atrocities committed into a development is classically Irish in terms of our ability to rape and pillage our memory, which was what Wood Quay was. It's a different type of context. There's a world of difference, as I wrote in a review of Jeffrey Robertson's recent book, between the crime against humanity of what happened to the mother and babies, which was in effect a form of cleansing of almost a genocidal nature, and the rape of a cultural heritage, which was Wood Quay. But they're all aspects of the rapacious capitalism and the unregulated developmental structures that pervade the Irish state. And Roderick, who I know very well and who worked with me in Griffith College as a senior lecturer, Roderick is absolutely right to complain against that, and there's no doubt that Besborough House should be kept as a form of memory, as a citadel to memory, and you cannot just rape over people's deaths in that way.
Even Wood Quay, they exhumed the bones and the
well exactly, and even in the Gleeson case, they're apparently still looking for Harry Gleeson's bones, without much success at this stage. But I think the point is, the Auschwitz point is very pressing. The Poles are not comfortable with it, but it is set as a memorial. And even Pope John Paul II, at one level, described it as a kind of a holy place. And that is not because it is not a monument to evil, it is, which it is, but it is also a monument not to forgetting. And once you paper up, I mean, the Germans are terrible about this.
Okay.
I mean, anyway, never mind.
Sorry, David. It just where we have to stick to the paper, And we're up against the clock as well.
Okay.
COVID rule breakers, cheeky burgers. 3 have fined €100 for 80-kilometer fast food spin. This is
the light side of life, right? Yeah.
From me.
Well, I mean, you've got to make light of the pandemic. You might as well fiddle as Rome burns to a bit. Yeah, but it is an aspect of the kind of spec capitalism that's taking over, selling people products they don't want, trying to manufacture a degree of crisis and consent. So it's part of that, cashing in people's misery, but the Sun is making light of it as it does.
Drug abuse on trains, rail union calls for Garda security blitz. Just to say, Cork is mourning the loss of Eamon Ryan, who was the Cork ladies footballers coach. And
was he a COVID death?
I'm actually not sure.
Because I mean, there have been so many people who are dying so precipitately, so quickly, that one wonders how many are.
He led them to 11 All Irelands or 10 All Irelands.
Oh yeah, no, I remember. Well, yeah, I do.
Okay, so we've got the Telegraph, shocking care home outbreak at levels not seen since first peak. David?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's an extraordinarily important point. There was a report recently in an English newspaper that one care home suffered all of its patients died as a result of COVID. The lack of scrutiny of care homes, both in Britain and Ireland, is always very dangerous. And of course, these are often people who are perceived to be close to the end of their lives. So therefore, there's a sense of forgetfulness about them. And what happens there happens in private situations. And that is very, very dangerous. But it is also a structural problem of the complete lack of resourcing of the healthcare system, both in Britain and Ireland, which has made us, in neoliberal terms, completely ill-equipped to deal with the pandemic. And of course, it is the vulnerable and the elderly who suffer the most.
Okay. On to the Times. 15,000 arrest records wiped in tech blunder. Any of your clients, David?
Not yet. I mean, it's a rather odd reflection in a way. I spoke to a lawyer in Dublin, and I remember, a criminal defence lawyer, I remember saying to him, God almighty, the crime wave in the north side of the city has got out of control. He said, great for business. So lawyer's reflection. I haven't seen any of that yet, no.
No. Mass school COVID testing not approved by regulator.
That's in The Guardian, yeah. I mean, there's a real... Well, there's a real odd question to be addressed about, which will come soon, about testing that is voluntary and testing that is compulsory. And we're going to face strict ethical questions about that. As far as children are concerned, key situation where you force someone to take a test on unproven necessarily vaccines with potential side effects and potential pre-existing life conditions. And it also becomes an attribution of an authoritarian state when you force someone to take a test. But it is a problem we're going to face, and there's going to be all sorts of legal challenges about consent and questions of imposition of consent on people in these circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, in Irish citizens will be better equipped than UK subjects, presumably. I mean, in terms of our constitution, no?
Well, not necessarily. There is an element that there is a case in Ireland, the Southwestern Health Board case, which establishes the principle ultimately that it is the state has limitations in terms of the imposition of its views on the consent of the family unit. But of course, that is also up against all these emergency power situations at the moment.
Yeah.
And so all rights are subject to that limiter. I think the difference between the British and Irish state, yes, the Irish state has a constitution. The Brits have the supervening structure of the European Convention, which Ireland has completely ignored. But Britain is less authoritarian as a state than the Irish state, which I think the responses to COVID have shown, you know?
Yeah, and how do you think that will resolve itself in terms of consent? And I mean,
well, I mean, I don't think people should be forced to take a COVID test unless they pose an obvious danger, which means unless there is significant levels of suspicion that they're a COVID spreader and significant evidentiary data to that effect, so that their very presence or interaction becomes dangerous in a particular workplace. Otherwise, you're involved in the process of dehumanization and treating people as cattle. And I don't think anyone, you know, I mean, even someone who's is given a drug towards the end of their life to kill pain can refuse it. And I think it's a very slippery slope when we start forcing medication or forcing vaccines on people. Having said that, there is a public health and public order consideration if the person is involved in the spreading activity.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting.
Well, I'd imagine there'll be a plethora of legal challenges both here and in Ireland if they started doing it. But my overarching point is I think the Irish state is more likely, given the complexion of the government, to behave in that sort of authoritarian way.
Yeah, just the fallout again from COVID is having 4.5 million on the NHS waiting list. There's no beds left apparently in.
Yeah, and and this week we've reached the epic position of being having the most infections in the world by a significant margin ahead of the Czech Republic, and it shows a failure of policy, or perhaps the relaxation of the restrictions over Christmas created a dynamic of party and Rome fiddling while Rome burned, which has created this. But we have an awful toxic time bomb here. We have people being frustrated from earning their living. We have a deregulation and underfinancing of the healthcare system. We have governmental failure to cope and mismanagement to appreciate the dimensions of the problem. We've got the historic neoliberal uncaring mindset which has affected the country. And there is no doubt that if the situation gets out of control, which it is getting perilously close to, all sorts of random things are going to happen. It's shocking.
David, can I take you, because we're going to run out of time, but I want to bring you to the Financial Times. The plans to tear up EU worker rights regime puts 48-hour week at risk. Are you familiar with this story?
Well, I mean, I'd imagine that those elements of the social chapter which were introduced in Britain or had to be accepted by virtue of EU directives and regulations will be quietly jettisoned. So there are a lot of things happening on the sly over here which are very dangerous.
Yeah, that was always a bone of contention, wasn't it? That the for the Tories, the workers' protection, EU law.
Well, it always has been since Thatcher. I mean, Thatcher had a crusade against the unions, and they abolished various trade union rights, and in terms of rights of industrial action. In legal terms, they restricted the ambit or abolished the ambit of the various industrial torts, intimidation, and things that had to do with collective bargaining. You had a war on the miners and so on. The Tories have always disliked the unionization, but it is, of course, now reached epic points, really.
Yeah.
And that's very dangerous, because we're reaching a point of limited levels of job security and protection. One hesitates and one doesn't think that Britain will become America, where there's no such thing as employment law, really. But it's a very dangerous development.
That is the alarm. That is the newspaper alarm.
And we didn't even talk about Donald Trump.
I mean, you're an impeachment specialist, so tell me.
Yeah, well, I did that. I had a set piece prepared about it, and I said, do you want me to talk about it briefly?
Can you do it in 2 minutes? Like you're coming up a case.
Okay, here's what I think. Everybody's cuckooing about the fact that the Congress have decided a certain way. There is going to be no impeachment. Johnson was impeached by the Congress, so was Clinton. They didn't get impeached by the Senate. You need a 2/3 majority. It ain't going to happen. Point number one. Point number two, Donald Trump can turn the not going to happen into a victory on his behalf. And I'm sure he will do so, quite apart from the martyrdom that Clinton turned the previous impeachment into as a form of martyrdom on his behalf as well. And Clinton also correctly, in his case, perhaps differently in Trump's, but I'm sure Trump will play the same card, turned it into a political crusade against him personally. So I don't see an impeachment, and I see an abreaction. And I just think the next number of days and weeks are going to be very, very interesting. Yes. We live in interesting times.
We do, in the Chinese sense of the word, in that term.
Yeah.
David,
often it is the weakest who are the strongest.
Well,
and where there is chaos, to quote another Chinese proverb, there is opportunity.
Well, it is a very Confucian time. Okay, David, thank you so much.
Not at all.
We'll see you next week, and your column is up on the site tomorrow. So we'll.
Yeah, no, I'm very grateful for that. But I do think that's a good line to end on in the Trump analysis. If you could include it in.
David, we're still recording, so
we're still recording. Okay. Then I won't go on about judges or anything like that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Lovely.
Thanks, David. Thank you.
Bye.